The rain had been falling since before dawn, steady, cold, unrelenting. In the narrow space behind a row of shuttered shops where rusted bins leaned into puddles and the gutters overflowed with leaves, the sound came faintly. It was not loud. Barely there, really. A whimper, thin and broken, rising just once above the tap of water on metal. Then again. Quieter. A man passing by on his early delivery route paused. His boots slowed in the puddled alley, eyes drawn toward the shadow between the bins. There, tucked beneath a collapsed cardboard box slick with rain, was a shape that barely stirred. A puppy, small, soaked through, its fur plastered to fragile bones. One leg twitched, then stilled. The man hesitated. The rain softened his breath as he crouched. He reached out slowly, palms forward, not to startle. The puppy didn't flinch. I just trembled, its eyes half closed, barely able to focus. Its stomach was hollowed, ribs showing through matted fur. A scrape above one paw was crusted with old dirt and blood. "It's okay, little one," the man whispered, kneeling fully now, his voice nearly lost in the rain. There were no signs of others nearby. No mother, no littermates, no prints in the mud but his own. The puppy had likely been there all night, maybe longer. How he'd ended up here, no one could say. A lost stray. A discarded burden. Maybe he had wandered too far from somewhere he should not have left. The man pulled off his jacket, unbuttoned the inner lining, and wrapped the pup gently. The animal didn't resist, just shivered against the new warmth, a low, breathy sound escaping his throat. He weighed almost nothing, the kind of weight that made lifting feel too easy, a sign of hunger, not health. The man didn't rush. He stood slowly, shielding the bundle from the rain with one hand as he walked. Each step back down the alley was careful, quiet. The rain kept falling. The world seemed unchanged. Inside the van, a folded blanket and a quiet heater offered the first true shelter. The puppy lay curled, unmoving, while drops from the man's sleeves darkened the cloth. For a long while, nothing happened. The pup's chest rose and fell in a shallow rhythm. No cry, no movement, no protest, just silence. There was a worn thermos in the glove compartment. A cap of lukewarm tea dabbed lightly at the pup's lips. No reaction, just the soft press of breath against the rim. Then a slight flicker of the tongue. The smallest sign. The man sat beside him, one hand resting gently on the blanket's edge. He didn't stroke the pup, didn't speak again. Just wait. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. The world beyond the windshield was still gray, still cold, but inside, a quiet warmth was beginning to grow, not from the heater, but from the stillness of shared space, a silent agreement between species. I will not harm. I will stay. The pup slept. If sleep it could be called, more of a faint drift into unconsciousness. The twitching had stopped, the whimpers too. Only breath remained, and as the light finally rose behind the thinning clouds, the man reached for the ignition. Not hurried, not unsure, just ready to carry a life, however small, away from the place it had nearly ended. The drive was short, barely 20 minutes. But each moment inside the van carried a certain stillness, the kind that comes only when life has been pulled back from the edge. The puppy lay in a nest of soft towels now, his wet fur beginning to dry in patches, his limbs folded close to his thin belly. His eyes opened once, then closed again, without focus or fear. Just fatigue. At the small veterinary outpost on the edge of the valley, a light was already on. The woman inside had seen many like him before, stray pups left to fend for themselves, some younger, some older. Not all survived, but when the man stepped in, holding the bundled form with both hands and speaking only a few words under his breath, she nodded. No questions, only action, slow and steady. The table was warm, heated from beneath, lined with clean cloth. As the blanket was peeled back, steam rose from the pup's damp coat. He remained still. One paw twitched. His nose flared gently at the scent of antiseptic in the room, but his eyes stayed closed. He had nothing left to give, not even fear. The woman moved gently, her hands light, practiced. She checked the pads of his paws, the shallow scrape on his foreleg, the ribs that showed too clearly. A faint pulse, breath, barely audible. No broken bones, just cold, hunger, and days of exhaustion etched into every inch of him. "There we go," she whispered, placing a dropper of warm glucose near his tongue. "Easy now." A slow swallow, barely noticeable. But it was something. She didn't try to clean him fully. Not yet. The goal was warmth, hydration, and quiet. A soft towel was wrapped around his body again, this time with a small heating pad near his chest. The man sat nearby, still in his rain-damp clothes, elbows on knees, watching. No words, just presence. The room was quiet. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. Inside, only the low hum of the heater and the distant creak of roof beams filled the air. Hours passed in that hush. The pup slept deeply, only shifting once to tuck his nose beneath his paw. At one point, as the light dimmed outside the single window, he stirred. A small sound. Not a cry, not a whimper, just a wet breath that caught in his throat. His eyes opened, glassy but clearer now, and his head lifted half an inch. He didn't look at anyone. Just toward the air, toward the scent of warmth. The woman rose, poured a shallow dish of warm formula, and set it beside the towel. She didn't place it near his mouth, didn't coax, just wait. After several minutes, he moved. A slow, sliding stretch of his front paw. Then the faintest nudge forward. It was ungraceful, clumsy, shaking, but he reached the edge of the towel, sniffed, and touched his tongue to the milk. Once, then again. The man exhaled through his nose just once. The woman gave a soft nod. For the first time since the alley, the pup was making a choice, however small, however tired. A gesture not of fear or reflex, but of instinct to continue. They left him alone that night, a small bed made in the quietest corner with thick blankets and a steady heat source beside him. Before switching off the light, the woman looked back once. The puppy was curled tightly, nose to belly, breath rising in slow rhythm. Not deep sleep, but rest. Real rest. In the stillness of the room, as the last light dimmed across the wall, the faintest sound could be heard, a soft exhale from the pup, no longer trembling. The first 24 hours passed in near silence. The clinic remained dim and warm, a cocoon of still air and soft light. The pup barely moved. Curled tightly in the corner of a padded bed, his chest rose and fell in a shallow rhythm, his limbs folded close as if to protect what little strength remained inside him. There was no sound beyond the hum of the small heater and the occasional breath from the woman seated nearby, watching. He had eaten a little the night before, a few licks of warm broth and softened food, but not enough to satisfy. It was not hunger he needed to conquer first, but exhaustion. His body had been running too long on instinct and fear. Sleep was the truest medicine. When she checked him at dawn, his ear twitched beneath her touch. A small response. He didn't wake, but he didn't flinch. His breathing was easier now, less ragged. She brushed a warm cloth gently along his side and found, beneath the thinning fur, small bruises faded to green and yellow. Older injuries. Faint signs of struggle, not from the past day, but from before. Perhaps from the nights he had survived alone, perhaps from hands that had not been gentle. Still, the room held no urgency. He was safe now, and his body was beginning to understand that. She changed his bedding without waking him, wiped his paws, and left him wrapped in soft towels. His tail didn't move, but his brow smoothed slightly when the blanket touched his spine. Outside, the wind shifted. Sunlight passed in and out of cloud cover, scattering muted gold across the floor. Time moved, but without pressure. By mid-afternoon, he stirred. Not fully awake, just the smallest motion of his front paw pressing outward, the slow extension of his neck. His nose lifted slightly, catching the scent of warm food placed nearby. Still, he didn't rise. He remained in place, breathing in, breathing out, resting, not hiding. She gave him space, no coaxing, no reaching hands. The food remained where it was, slowly cooling, but I'm still waiting. The evening settled in quietly. The clinic lights were dimmed. Curtains pulled back just enough for dusk to enter without noise. Birds outside made their last calls, and the sound seemed to touch something inside him. The pup raised his head, just a little, ears half lifted. He looked toward the bowl. His limbs were stiff. He tried to rise, faltered, then tried again. The effort was slow, but deliberate. Each step, even shaky, felt like a choice. He reached the dish, nosed it once, and began to eat. Not quickly, not enough to fill him, just a few bites. Then he stepped back, returned to his spot, and curled up again. That night, the woman stayed later. She didn't approach. She simply watched from the chair beside the wall. At one point, the pup opened his eyes and met hers. No fear, just a long, quiet gaze. She offered a whisper, "You're safe now." He closed his eyes again. The next morning brought movement. He stood when she entered, unsteady but upright. His ears twitched at her voice. He sniffed the towel she laid down and stepped onto it himself. When she placed the bowl, he ate more this time. Half of it gone before he paused. She noticed how he no longer kept his body tight to the wall. He sat now at an angle, open to the room. A subtle change, but telling. Later that day, he walked the full length of the clinic floor. Carefully. Slowly. He sniffed every corner, every leg of the chairs. When she opened the door to the side yard, he stopped at the threshold. The sun warmed the tile just inside. He stepped into it and laid down, not yet outside, but facing it. The slow return had begun. That evening, as the wind settled and shadows grew longer, she offered him a small cloth toy. Nothing bright or noisy, just soft fabric tied into a gentle knot. He approached it cautiously, sniffing first, then pawing once. Later, after she had stepped away, he pulled it close and rested his chin upon it. Not to play. Not yet. Just to hold. Each day brought a little more. He learned the rhythm of the room, when light came, when food was served, when quiet settled in. He waited near the door in the mornings, not to leave, but to watch the breeze touch the grass. He lay still for longer stretches, not because he lacked energy, but because he no longer feared the silence. She noticed how he no longer startled when footsteps passed outside. He no longer flinched at distant barking. Even the clink of bowls in the sink didn't send him retreating. He would lift his head, watch, and remain. By the end of the week, he met her hand halfway. When she crouched to clean his bedding, he stepped toward her, nose low, tail neutral. He allowed her to brush the knots from behind his ears. He didn't lean in, but he didn't move away. When she whispered to him, he flicked his ears and blinked slowly. She took him outside on the 8th day. Not far, just a few feet beyond the door. The ground was soft, still damp in places from old rain. He walked the perimeter of the small enclosed yard, pausing to sniff the base of the fence. Then, without instruction, he lay down in the patch of sunlight near the center. He dozed there for nearly an hour. By the 10th day, his steps no longer trembled. His appetite returned fully. He ate with purpose, not hurried, but whole. When she approached with fresh towels, he wagged his tail once. Not fast, just once. That afternoon, he played. It was brief. A sudden dash across the room, ears up, a quick pivot and bounce. The toy he had once only touched was now in his mouth. He carried it in a circle, then dropped it at her feet. She laughed gently, not loudly, just enough for him to lift his head in recognition. It was not the play of a young pup untouched by hardship. It was the hesitant joy of one who had known hunger, cold, and isolation, now remembering that the body can move with lightness. That night he dreamed. His paws twitched. A soft sound escaped his throat. Not a whimper, not a cry, just breath moving through memory. She stayed near. Let him rest. The heater hummed quietly, and in the quiet hours before dawn, he woke only once, lifted his head, turned it slowly toward the door, where wind stirred the edge of the curtain. He watched it sway, then lowered his head again. The return was no longer slow, it was steady. The light came early that morning, soft and gray, sifting gently through a break in the clouds that had held rain for days. The air smelled of earth and drying bark, the ground still wet from storms past. Inside the clinic, the pup was already awake. He had begun to rise with the dawn now, not in fear, but in a quiet rhythm. His strength had returned in pieces, never all at once. First the appetite, then the small walks around the room. A slight lift of the tail, a gentle bark, muffled, as if testing his voice. He stood by the window, paws just beneath the sill, ears up. The glass was cool against his nose as he leaned forward, watching the breeze move across the long grass. The woman had noticed the change. His alertness, the tension replaced by calm. There was a readiness in him now, as if he were waiting for something not yet known. Then it came. A sound, thin at first, carried by the wind. A bark, low and steady, far across the field. The pup froze. His ears twitched forward, body leaning into the sound. Another bark followed. Deeper, slower. The kind that didn't search but announced. The kind used by dogs who knew where they were and who they called for. He turned quickly, almost slipping on the floor, then ran to the door. Not frantic, just certain. The woman watched him, standing very still. She walked toward the door, opened it without a word. He stepped outside, pausing once to look back. A moment, then he moved again. The morning had opened wide. The sky was still heavy, but light moved beneath it like breath. The grass, waist-high in places, parted around the pup as he passed through. His movements were faster now, more sure-footed, though he still limped slightly on the paw that had once been scraped raw. From the far end of the field, just at the edge where wild brush met fence line, a dog emerged. Her body was older, lean with muscle, fur dusted with age. She did not move quickly. She waited, ears forward, her eyes locked in place. The pup stopped several feet away, his head lowered. Then, slowly, he approached. The older dog stepped forward and their noses met. No bark, no growl, just breathe. Recognition passed between them like scent. They circled each other once. The older dog let her flank touch his side gently. He stayed close. The vet had stepped out behind the woman now. Both stood far back, saying nothing. "Is that his mother?" the vet asked softly. The woman did not answer right away. She watched the way the pup moved beside the older dog. The way he didn't try to run or play but mirrored her pace. He had done that before, with her hand, her steps. Now it belonged to someone else. The pair began to walk. Not away, but along the fence. They moved slowly, the older one glancing back from time to check he was near. The pup didn't look back again. Not once. They reached the edge of the field and turned into the brush, tails low, bodies relaxed. It wasn't an escape. It was a return. And though the woman's heart held a soft ache, it did not feel like loss. She watched until they disappeared from view. The wind moved through the grass again, brushing where they had walked. And in that space, left quiet behind them, something lingered. A bond not broken, only changed. Later that afternoon, the woman placed a shallow dish of food beneath the tree at the fence's edge, not to lure them back, but to honor their return. It remained untouched until dusk. Then, as light fell and the sky burned orange, small paw prints pressed into the mud nearby. The food was gone by morning. Each day for a week, the dish was filled. Some days it remained full. Other days, it was emptied gently. No mess, no scattered signs of conflict, just the presence of something quiet, careful, known. The pup didn't reappear at the window again. But sometimes, far across the field, a flash of movement stirred at the edge of the trees. Always just before dusk, always in pairs. The woman kept the towel he had slept on, folded neatly on a shelf in the clinic's back room. Once, when she passed it, she paused, laid a hand atop it, and stood there in stillness, her breath slow, her eyes not on the towel, but on something only she could see. There was no collar, no name, but the memory was sharp as the scent of rain, alive, uncontained, and permanent in the quiet spaces he had left behind. She thought of the way he had stood in the rain that first day, soaked, trembling, nearly silent, and then how he had walked away, days later, beside the older dog, their bodies aligned in a silent understanding. It had not been a rescue, not entirely. The reunion was delayed. On the 10th day, the dish remained full. No tracks appeared in the soil, no rustle in the brush, no shadows at the edge of the clearing, just the stillness of wind and the low hum of insects returning with the warm air. She waited 3 more evenings. Then, gently, she stopped filling the dish. The grass grew taller in its place. The wind blew it flat some days, then let it rise again. The land, always patient, always changing, held the shape of what had passed without trying to keep it. Somewhere beyond the hills, the pair moved still. Maybe farther now, maybe only steps away. It didn't matter. The bond had done its work, and when the rain came again, soft, slow, almost warm, the woman stood beneath the eaves of the clinic and watched the drops gather in the grass, listening to the sound of it washing the dust from the leaves. She didn't look for paw prints. She simply let the wind carry what it would and held what remained in the quiet. The field waited, and somewhere inside it, the echo of a bark remained, drifting through the rainlight like memory. Not loud, not clear, but true. They were gone for hours. After the older dog had first appeared and the pup had followed her into the tall grass, the field seemed to close behind them. Only movement in the reeds remained, a gentle bend here, a ripple of motion there, then silence. No barking, no sounds of play or distress, just the quiet of 2 animals moving with instinct through a world that had once been uncertain and was now shifting toward something remembered. The woman had waited near the fence that whole morning, a folded towel in her hands, the one the pup had once slept in. She didn't call out or attempt to follow. The vet beside her said nothing either. Some reunions belonged to the animals alone. By midday, the sun had risen behind thin clouds, softening the light into a pale, even warmth that touched the grass without burning. Wind had returned, barely enough to move a leaf, but it carried scent, the kind only dogs could read. And it carried something else, too. Patience. Then, without sound or announcement, the older dog returned. She came from the same break in the fence, head low, tail still. Her eyes were wary but calm. Behind her, the pup followed. His pace was slower now, not from weakness but from something deeper. Awareness, perhaps. A weight that had shifted inside him since morning. He stayed close, never more than 2 strides behind her, stopping when she stopped, moving when she moved. He looked different, not stronger in the obvious way. His ribs still showed, his legs still thin. But he held himself with balance now. No longer a creature drifting through recovery. He had a purpose, direction. A thread had been retied inside him. They didn't approach the humans. They stayed along the edge, circling the outer perimeter, the way feral dogs do when they're not sure whether to stay or leave. The pup looked up once at the woman, eyes unblinking, ears gently angled forward. Not asking, not begging, just aware. She took one step forward, then paused. "It's your choice," she said softly, the wind almost swallowing the words. The older dog turned, a slow movement of her head, then she sat. The pup stood beside her, not leaning in, but close enough to touch. He looked between them, human and dog, and then sat too. There was time, then. Time to watch. Time to wait. The humans didn't interfere. They simply stood, hands by their sides, hearts quietly adjusting to the weight of departure. They'd seen this before, the in-between moment when an animal stands at the border of two worlds, one of safety, one of freedom, and neither feels wrong. Eventually, the older dog rose and began to walk. The pup hesitated just long enough for the woman to catch her breath. Then he followed. His tail, barely visible in the grass, swayed once. They moved along the tree line, away from the shelter, away from the buildings and the scent of metal and antiseptic. There was no trail, no clear destination, just direction. They walked slowly. The older dog paused often, not from fatigue but to wait, to guide. Her movements were economical, her body used to long distances and long nights. The pup mimicked her gait, not perfectly, but close enough that it no longer looked like guessing. The woman returned inside only briefly. She packed a cloth bag with 2 sealed pouches of softened kibble and a collapsible water dish. She left it under a nearby tree, close to the path they had taken. Not as bait, not as charity, just in case. The day passed without return. But on the second morning, the bag had been moved. Not torn, just opened, gently disturbed. The food was gone. The water dish was drained and nudged to one side as though touched by a paw. The man who had found the puppy said little, but when he saw the dish, he crouched beside it for a long time, fingers brushing over the slight indentations in the dirt. "They're doing fine," he said at last, to no one in particular. Days turned to a week. Reports came in from the nearby valley. 2 dogs seen near the creek at dusk, a small one and a larger brindle one, always together. A neighbor left scraps near their shed and found the bowl licked clean in the morning. No mess, no damage, just absence after presence. The woman didn't go looking. She knew better than to chase the wild parts of healing. By the 10th day, the rains returned. Not harsh this time, just soft, steady, warm. The kind that sinks into the soil and turns everything green again. That morning, near the edge of the same field where the puppy had once stood in the rain, they returned. Not to stay, just to pass through. The older dog walked first, her body damp but clean. Coat glinting slightly under the gray light. The pup, no longer just a pup now, had grown into himself, not in size but in certainty. His body still held the softness of youth, but his movements were deliberate. He kept his gaze forward, but he paused as they passed the edge of the field. The woman was there, crouched low in the grass, still as the earth. He saw her, his ears lifted. One paw raised, then set back down. She didn't move, didn't call out, just watched. He blinked once, then turned, following the older dog into the thicket, the grasses parting around them like breath. There was no goodbye, only a passing of presence. Afterward, the woman sat alone in the field, the same towel folded in her lap, damp now. Weathered at the edges, but still carrying the shape of something that had once curled tightly into it. The clouds shifted above, letting through a column of faint light. The wind moved low across the grass, brushing it in slow waves. Far off, a bird called, not a cry, just a note of belonging. And in that soft rainlight, where wild things moved without need for words, 2 shapes disappeared into the quiet, woven once again into the land that had waited for them all along.